There aren't many demonic possession cases out there in the world, but today the cases of George Lukins, Michael Taylor, and more are here to terrify and educate y'all. So, the Reverend Joseph Easterbrook, the Anglican vicar of Temple Church, was summoned on Saturday the 31st of May of 1778 by a Mrs. Sarah Barber, a woman who was traveling in the village of Yatton Mendip in the county of Somerset. Now the woman told the pastor that she came across a man by the name of George Lukins, a tailor and common carrier by profession who had a strange sickness, if you will, in which he sang and screamed in various sounds, some of which did not resemble a human voice, and declared that doctors could do him no service. Now Mrs. Barber attested to the clergyman that George had an extraordinary good character and attended services of worship, where he had received the church sacraments, so all around a good guy. However, for the past 18 years he had been subject to a lot of fits, which somebody believed resulted from a supernatural slap which knocked him down while he was acting in a Christmas pageant of all things. Now he was consequently taken under the care of Dr. Smith, among many other physicians who really tried to help him, but sadly after his 20-week stay at St. George's Hospital, the medical community there pronounced him incurable. Now members of the community began to think that he was bewitched, and he himself declared that he was possessed by 7 demons who could only be driven out by, well, 7 clergymen. So Reverend Joseph Easterbrook contacted Methodist ministers in connection with all of this, who agreed to pray for George. Now we do have a quote from one of the reverends involved in the exorcisms, a Reverend John Valton. He said that some time ago I had a letter requesting me to make one of these 7 ministers to pray over George. I cried out before God, Lord, I am not fit for such a work. I have not faith to encounter a demon. It was powerfully applied. God in thy might. The day before we were to meet, I went to see George and found such faith that I could then encounter the 7 devils which he said tormented him. I did not doubt, but deliverance would come. Suffice to say, when we met, the Lord heard prayer and delivered the poor man. So an account of the exorcism was actually published in the Bristol Gazette. The newspaper reported that George, during his possession, claimed he was the devil, made barking noises, sung an inverted song, and was just overall very violent. And in light of these claims, on Friday the 13th of June of 1778, 7 clergymen, including the Reverend Joseph Easterbrook, accompanied George to the vestry at Temple Church, where they performed an exorcism on the man, which included hymn singing, prayer, all the usual stuff. The deliverance concluded when the demons were allegedly cast out using the Trinitarian formula. The clergyman commanded the demons to return to hell, and George then exclaimed, "Blessed Jesus," praised God, recited the Lord's Prayer, and then thanked the clergyman. Now, Reverend Easterbrook, when recording the events under the patronage of John Wellesley, stated that the account would be doubted in this modern era of skepticism, but pointed to the scriptures and other authentic history of ancient as well as modern times to really explain what he felt was a valid case of demonic possession. Once again, after the exorcism, George was calm and happy. Now, following this case, several pieces of literature were printed on this entire situation, thus popularizing this case of diabolical possession, despite the original plans to keep it kind of quiet, for George's sake. In the spring of 1842, Pastor Johann Christoph Blumhardt was advised by his parishioners to investigate the strange goings-on at the home of the Dittis siblings. Orphaned and bereaved of several other siblings as well, 4 of them, Gottlieben, Anna Maria, Katharina, and another, lived together in a tumble-down house under the conditions of extreme poverty. But that wasn't the primary target of concern. It was the noises, the strange lights, and above all, the strange behavior of, I'm going to call her G, that called for further examination. Now, when he arrived at the place, G didn't really respond warmly to the pastor's friendly overtures. He let her be, but then neighbors were still complaining. She fell down, she fell ill, the noises in the house were so loud they kept them up at night. So Johann told the siblings to stay with a relative overnight, while he and trusted members of the congregation searched the house. And that's where they found a lot of weird stuff, and his fears were confirmed. They found evidence of dabbling in occult magic, and oh bother. Now further inquiry revealed that G's early life had been filled with attempted initiations into such dark traffic at, well, why? Her elders did it. Spiritualist studies weren't really unknown at the time, and reputable figures investigated a lot of reports of poltergeists, conversations with the dead, spirits of all kinds. It's kind of commonplace. Johann was determined. He decided to try and pray and place his trust in the Lord. But things didn't get better for G. If anything, they got worse, especially when Johann came near. She fainted, she shook, she foamed at the mouth in delirious fits, then she would come to and appear and, well, be sane, I guess, for all intents and purposes. Johann eventually became convinced that whatever was at work was in fact the devil, or a devilish spirit. One night in late June, G once again fell into a trance. Now this time, Johann grabbed her hand, shouted into her ear, "Place your hands together and pray. Lord Jesus, help me. We have seen long enough what the devil can do. Now we desire to see also what Jesus can do." And somehow, G regained consciousness, joined the pastor in prayer, and settled down again. And from then on, Johann's strategy didn't vary. He kept her company. He prayed with her. He invited her to pray as well. The prayers were simple and spontaneous. If the spirits tried to talk to Johann, he told them to keep silent. If they refused, he left. But here's the thing. G continued to suffer attacks, and they increased in scale and severity. She pummeled herself, yanked out her own hair, spat as if trying to purge from within, lost weight to a dangerous degree. It got really bad. She would hemorrhage, and she would attribute the wounds to spirits. Almost a year after the pastor's first visit, she began to upchuck objects. We're talking sand, nails, shoelaces, pins, and then they came out through her skin, but they would leave no wound. By Christmas of 1843, this struggle had lasted for almost 2 years, and by the end of that year, G wasn't the only one dealing with demonic harm. Her sister, Katharina, her brother, all struggling as well. As usual, Johann went to sit with them. He prayed with them and for them. Katharina was in such a state that she was trying to tear herself to pieces, but then, at about 2 in the morning, she let a loud noise, loud enough to shake the house, doubled over backward, and then shouted, "Jesus is victor!" And so he was. Somehow, the evil spirits were defeated. With that cry of defeat and, joy, I suppose, the demons were broken, as were the spell that had been held over the entire family. All the alarming manifestations stopped, and G and her sisters and brothers were back to being themselves again. So the next story. The whispers started in April of 2003 in the mind of this 23-year-old nun. In the heart of an Orthodox convent in Romania's impoverished northeast, doctors say Marisisia Irina Cornici believed she heard the devil talking to her, telling her she was sinful. Now, originally she was treated for schizophrenia, but when she relapsed, a monk and 4 nuns tried a different method, exorcism. Now, in order to restrain her from violent movements, including those causing her to harm herself, the nuns bound her hand and feet and locked her in her room as they participated in the liturgy commemorating the ascension of Jesus. A few days later, they chained her to a cross with her arms stretched out and carried her into the church so that they could anoint her. Well, by the way, on top of this bad stuff earlier, she was gagged with a towel and left in a really dank room at the convent for 3 days without food, where, she died of dehydration. So originally, when she was moved to her room, she was untied and she was cured. She was given bread and tea, but when she fainted after eating, the nuns couldn't awaken her, and when they felt that her pulse was weak, they called an ambulance. Well, in the ambulance, she was given about 6 doses of adrenaline, so by the time she reached the hospital, she was gone from us. The police were notified by the doctors at the hospital, who noticed the marks that were left from all the restraining. The autopsy claimed that she had passed from dehydration, exhaustion, and a lack of oxygen. Now, the father and the 4 nuns who had helped with this exorcism were charged with death and depriving a person of liberty. Prosecutors sought a life sentence for the priest, but he was sentenced in 2007 to 14 years in prison, while the nuns got 5 to 8 years. So next up, this rare and disturbing footage has been released of a woman writhing around on the floor and screaming as an exorcism is performed on her over in Argentina. The 22-year-old woman, identified only by her first name Laura, is pinned to the ground as Bishop Manuel Acuna drives the evil spirits out of her. As she screams "no, no" and spits some really bad words out at one of the women holding her, the bishop is heard muttering, leave her now." Now, before the exorcism, locals gathered at the church in Buenos Aires, praying for her soul and redemption. The bishop told them the demon exists. Laura was then led into a chamber where church helpers held her to the ground. Local man Augustus Amador Arevalo, who had gone to pray for her, said, "We could hear her screaming and crying as we prayed for her deliverance. Apparently she was like a good person, but when the devil possessed her, yikes. She had to be exorcised. She had to be set free." The exorcism came to an end as she suddenly gave out a really weird cry and then closes her eyes, falls backwards, exhausted, wiping away tears as the priest once again made the sign of the cross over her body. And the bishop said she was good. He said, "Thank God, we've recovered a daughter of God." And finally for today, back in the 1970s, Michael Taylor was kind of an ordinary guy over in Yorkshire. He, his wife Christine, their offspring, and their pet poodle lived really happy lives. And now we're gonna pop that bubble. In 1974, Christine stated to a Christian fellowship group to which they both belonged that his relationship with the leader of the group, Marie Robinson, was carnal in nature. Michael admitted that he felt evil within him and eventually attacked Marie verbally, who screamed back at him. Marie said that his eyes began to change to something bestial, and then he started to speak in tongues. Michael had no memory of the event, something all too common in cases of possession. Now during the next meeting, he received an absolution, but his behavior continued to become more erratic. So as a result, the local vicar called in other ministers, experienced in deliverance in preparation to cast out the demons residing within the man. Now this exorcism, which occurred between the 5th and 6th of October of 1974 at St. Thomas's Church in Gobber, was led by Father Peter Vincent, who was the Anglican priest of St. Thomas's, and was helped out by a Methodist clergyman, the Reverend Raymond Smith. Over the next 8 hours, Michael would repeatedly have crucifixes stuffed inside of his mouth while being doused with holy water. Now according to Bill Ellis, an authority on folklore and the occult in contemporary culture, the exorcists believed that they had, in an all-night ceremony, invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including those of, well, some really bad stuff, blasphemy, bestiality, and lewdness. In the end, exhausted, they allowed Taylor to go home, but they were like, I think he still has some demons. Well, go figure. While at home, he brutally ended the life of his wife, Christine, by attacking her with his bare hands, tearing some body parts out, and almost tearing her face off. He was eventually found by a policeman, completely nude in the street and covered in red fluid. Well, at his trial, he was acquitted on the grounds of insanity and was sent to the Broadmoor Hospital for 2 years, then spent another 2 years in a secure ward in Bradford before being released.
Number 5 on this list is the Panama 7. The following story happened only a few years ago and is a horrifying tale where 7 people in Panama were found dead from a terrifying ritual. The BBC writes 10 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder. The suspects and all victims were thought to belong to the Nagobi indigenous community. The grave was discovered after 3 villagers escaped and made their way to a local hospital last weekend, prosecutor Rafael Baloy said. They then alerted authorities about several families being held by an indigenous-run sect. On Wednesday, police raided the community located in a jungle region in northwest Panama, some 250 kilometers from the capital Panama City. They were performing a ritual inside the structure. In that ritual, there were people being held against their will, being mistreated, said Mr. Balois. All of these rites were aimed at killing them if they didn't repent their sins. Inside the makeshift church, officers found a naked woman, machetes, knives, and a ritually sacrificed goat, Mr. Balois said. The site was controlled by a religious sect called the New Light of God, believed to have been operating in the region for about 3 months. According to Mr. Balois, the kidnapping and torture started last Saturday after one of the members claimed to have received a message from God. The victims were then kidnapped from their homes, beaten, and So let me ask you guys, does that sound like something that God would tell you to do? Gather up a bunch of people, hold them against their will, and torture and kill them? To me, if any sort of entity was to tell you to do something like that, then that would be a demon or maybe the devil. Maybe that demonic entity would portray themselves as God or someone else, but I don't know what type of God would do something like this. To be completely honest, folks, I'm really not a religious person, so when I hear something like this, I believe that this was the work of people who were extremely sick or misguided. But I can guarantee to them, they probably really felt like they were acting as the vessel for some higher being. I think in this instance though, they really did misjudge who that higher being was. This happened literally back in 2020 as well, guys, so really not that long ago. My heart truly does go out to the people that were killed and to the families of those who were taken way too soon. Number 4 on this list is The Devil Made Me Do It. This famous Ed and Lorraine case may be the best example of when someone tried to claim a demonic possession led to a crime. The case is centered around a young man named Orrin Cheyenne Johnson and the man that he murdered, a 40-year-old named Alan Bono. Mental Floss says there was no question that Johnson killed Bono. However, his defense attorney, 33-year-old Martin Minella, planned to argue that the 19-year-old was not guilty by virtue of demonic possession. Ahead of the trial, Minella pled his case through the media, giving interviews to major press outlets. The courts have dealt with the existence of God, and now they'll be asked to deal with the existence of the demonic spirit, Minella told People. The day after Johnson was arrested, Lorraine Warren called the Brookfield police and blamed the killing on a demon. Johnson didn't actually say the devil made him do it, he only claimed that he didn't remember stabbing Bono. However, according to the testimony of an officer on the scene, Johnson did tell the police, "I think I hurt someone." Now, this defense didn't actually work out for Johnson. He was inevitably convicted of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. However, he didn't serve nearly that many and was released after less than 5 years for being a really good prisoner. In my opinion, I kind of doubt that this guy was actually under the influence of a demonic possession, and clearly the jury, they felt the same way. That being said though, he did seem pretty committed to that story during the trial, so I suppose it's something to consider. Number 3 on this list is Manuel Vela. Several years ago, Manuel Vela killed his pregnant girlfriend. It was a brutal murder and an incident which climaxed in a police chase where he was finally captured. Many people obviously asked the question, why? And the answer may shock you. The Mystique says Vela told the interviewers that the murder of his girlfriend and her child were part of a religious and political statement. He was possibly trying to enlighten the crowd of his opinion on pro-life ideologies. However, it seemed like his motivation behind the murders wasn't just politically backed. He went on to say how he is the Antichrist and the voices in his head guided him on what to do. Many of his analogies were akin to things that have happened in the history of Christianity. Vela literally believed that he was the Antichrist, guys. That sounds like a pretty textbook example of a demonic possession to me. At this point, Vela's competency to stand trial was in question and a hearing needed to be done. Manuel never actually made it to the hearing though, because in January 2017, authorities found him dead in his cell. He had taken his own life. Number 2 on this list is the Son of Sam. The Son of Sam was a killer that caused one of the biggest citywide police investigations ever. Ranker says New York City during the summer of 1976 was a hotbed of anger, frustration, and fear, and David Berkowitz, aka the Son of Sam, didn't help the matter by killing 6 people and wounding 7 others in the span of 1 year. After his arrest, Berkowitz told police that he was under the control of a demon named Harvey who inhabited his neighbor's dog and implored him to kill people. Once, during a 3-month break from his murder spree, Berkowitz wrote the New York Post to say, "I am still here like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest." After being incarcerated, Berkowitz received a sentence of 365 years in prison, by the way. He became a born-again Christian, but he still believes that the devil and God are fighting for possession of his soul. No wonder this guy got 365 years. Not only did he kill 6 people, but to write to the Times saying that he's still thirsty and hungry, yeah. This is clearly a man that needs to be kept behind bars for literally ever. Once again, I want to stress the fact here that I'm not a religious man personally. When I hear a story like this, I believe that it's far more likely that the Son of Sam was just truly mentally unstable and probably in need of some very serious help. He truly believed though that a demon had called upon him and was using his body as a vessel for evil. We may never know what truly caused him to do this, but at least he's locked up for good and won't be doing it again anytime soon. And finally, number 1 on this list is Michael Taylor. Several decades ago, Taylor was apparently possessed by a horrible demon, and this time it really got the better of him. Ranker says in 1974, Michael Taylor was just a simple butcher living in Ossett, England, who was suddenly overcome by an evil spirit. He had an exorcism performed on October 5th and 6th of 1974, and while it went okay, the priests weren't able to expel all of the demons. According to Bill Ellis, an authority on folklore and the occult in contemporary culture, in an all-night ceremony, the exorcists believed that they had invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including those of incest, bestiality, blasphemy, and lewdness. At the end, exhausted, they allowed Taylor to go home, although they felt that at least 3 demons, insanity, murder, and violence, were still left in him. So, kind of the big 3. After he returned home, Taylor immediately murdered his wife by ripping out her eyes and tongue and then tearing off most of the skin from her face, finally strangling their pet poodle. Police found Taylor standing in the street naked and covered in blood, shouting, "It is the blood of Satan." This is truly one of the most graphic crimes I've ever read about, honestly. Like, to think that this happened in real life is extremely scary. Also, if he was possessed by some type of demon, like, what demon was this and how do we all avoid this? I feel like this is pretty pertinent information considering what Taylor ended up doing.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Elizabeth Knapp. Granted, around the time of the Salem witch trials, a lot of things may have been interpreted as demonic or paranormal when they shouldn't have been. Just take a look at all of the people accused of witchcraft for patently non-witchy things and you'll see what I'm saying. If someone weighed the same as a duck, that means she's also made of wood. And people burn wood, but people also burn witches, right? I'm getting away from the topic at hand, sorry. 20 years before the start of the Salem witch trials, there was a young woman working for Samuel Willard, a somewhat prominent reverend in Massachusetts. That girl was named Elizabeth Knapp, and she may have been possessed by a demon. A little odd considering the holy nature of the man she worked for, but that's how the story goes. One October, Elizabeth started to complain of pains all throughout her body, ones that couldn't really be explained. As time went on, these pains increased in frequency and intensity, so she went to the Reverend. She told him that she would often convulse uncontrollably and had many fits of screaming and crying for no apparent reason. It even felt like she was being strangled by an unknown, unseeable force. Needless to say, these behaviors concerned the Reverend. Eventually, Elizabeth told the Reverend that her ailments all began when she made a deal with the devil. Classic. She somehow got in touch with this underworld overlord and exchanged her soul for eternal youth and exorbitant sums of money. Once these admissions were made, things got much worse. Elizabeth would speak in a terrifying, distorted voice, and it often appeared that the devil was speaking through her. Her body would contort in such violent and grotesque ways that it took multiple people to hold her down. In addition to all of that, her throat also swelled up like a balloon, which couldn't have been very comfortable. Unfortunately, nobody really knows what happened to this poor young lass. In the Reverend's journals, all sorts of demonic experiences were detailed, but he eventually conceded that he wasn't quite sure what to do with the girl. He didn't know what exactly was happening to her, but he could tell that the things going on weren't voluntary. Whatever demonic presence had overtaken Elizabeth Knapp was determined to stick around and prevent anyone else from ruining its fun. Coming in at number 4, we've got Bobby Jindal. Most of the time, American politicians don't have too many dealings with the devil. Well, not publicly anyways, it would ruin their reputation. However, this former governor of Louisiana says he found himself face to face with a demon and even wrote an article about his experience. That's gutsy for sure, especially for a guy who would eventually run for public office and win. Well, it sort of came back and bit him in the ass because he likely could have run for vice president alongside Mitt Romney. And looking back, it becomes increasingly apparent that his dealings with demons put a big hole in his VP aspirations. But enough political talk, let's get to the demon. In his article titled "Beating a Demon: Physical Dimensions of Spiritual Warfare," published in the New Oxford Review, Jindal describes his attempts to exorcise a demon from his pal Susan. Poor Susan. Apparently, the undergraduate was undergoing treatment for her cancer at the time, and some of the effects made Jindal suspect there might be a demon present. He and a bunch of other Christian college students banded together to perform an impromptu exorcism. They had contacted a preacher to preside over the proceedings, but this holy man told them to hold off on the exorcism. In his article, Jindal questions whether the preacher simply did not want to come over to a college dorm, or if he was worried about the demon potentially being too powerful. In the end, the group of students went through with it, holding Susan down as best they could as she struggled and attempted to escape. Eventually, a student from a rival Christian college organization burst in with a crucifix, and this seemed to work on the demon. When they read Bible verses aloud, Susan screamed profanities and questioned the value of the religion. However, in between these supposedly demonic outbursts, Susan also showed her true face, begging to be rescued from her possessor. In the end, the demon was said to be removed, and Susan was able to return to life as normal. However, Jindal's eventual political aspirations would be cut short thanks to this demonic possession. One has to wonder what would possess him to write his experiences so plainly. Coming in at number 3, we've got Michael Taylor. This case is a peculiar one indeed. Back in the 70s, Michael Taylor was working as a butcher in West Yorkshire. He and his wife had recently joined a Christian fellowship group which Taylor took very seriously. A little too seriously perhaps, as he soon began engaging in what his wife describes as carnal relations with the leader of the fellowship group, Mary Robinson. This didn't sit well with his wife, so she called it out in front of the rest of the group's members. Most people would probably yell something rude and profane and then slink away in embarrassment, but Michael Taylor, he claimed that he'd been feeling evil inside of him and got really mad at Robinson. After this, he requested an absolution but continued to act strangely. This behavior encouraged a local vicar to seek out external help, so he brought in a couple of ministers to assist with an exorcism. This demonic expulsion went on overnight and supposedly removed over 40 demons from Taylor. However, they didn't get them all. The ministers said that 3 demons still remained inside: insanity, murder, and violence. You can probably see where this is going. After this all-night affair, Michael Taylor returned home. During his time there, he ended his wife's life and strangled their pet dog. He was found wandering the streets in a daze covered in blood. Adultery, insanity, then violence. Those must have been some serious demons. Either that or Taylor just wanted out of his marriage, but couldn't think of a better way to go about it. Coming in at number 2, we've got George Lukins, not to be confused with George Lucas. Of all the times one could get possessed by a demon, you would think that a Christmas pageant would be pretty low on the list, you know, celebrating the birth of the holiest of holy figures and all. But poor George Lukins, he couldn't catch a break. He'd been performing at his local pageant and seemed to fall over for no reason. According to Lukins, it wasn't too much eggnog that did it. It was a supernatural force that slapped him, knocking him to the ground. In the following years, Lukins developed a seemingly incurable condition that doctors couldn't explain. He could though, and he said that it was demons. Multiple presences attempting to take over his body. When doctors gave up on curing him, a priest stepped in. He performed an exorcism on Lukins, which became quite the public event. Folks from all over came to see how it was going, and many reported a very disturbing scene, including Lukins claiming that he was the devil, becoming violent, and even barking like a dog. After all this though, Lukins seemed to be cured. The priest said that he sent the demons back to hell and that Lukins was a God-loving person once more. And finally at number 1, we've got Clara Germana Cele. If nuns are getting tossed around like rag dolls, it's time to investigate what's going on. And this is exactly the case when it comes to this South African possession. 16-year-old Clara Germana Cele had supposedly made a pact with the devil and used her newfound abilities for evil. She made animalistic noises that chilled the bones of all who could hear them and gained supernatural strength. At one point, she even levitated off the ground, only to be brought back by splashes of holy water. Folks aren't exactly sure why she made this deal, but when a 16-year-old starts throwing nuns across the room, you don't try to get to the root of the problem, you try to stop it immediately. The exorcism was a grueling 2-day ordeal in which Clara attempted to suffocate the priest multiple times. She spoke languages she couldn't possibly have been familiar with and projected a terrifying demonic voice. Eventually, the demon was exorcised, but nobody involved would ever be the same again. So, making deals with devils doesn't seem so sweet now, does it?
Number 5, Okiku. Have you ever wanted to cut a doll's hair? Did you have a Barbie growing up that you gave a haircut to and were surprised when it didn't quite work out the way you'd hoped? Not that that ever happened to me with any of my sister's Barbies or anything. Anyway, if that's your fancy, maybe this haunted doll would be right up your alley. Okiku is a doll of Japanese urban myth. A possessed doll that seemingly endlessly grows real human hair. Disgusting. Okiku is a fairly prominent doll in Japanese stories, and as such, there are several conflicting legends and details, so I'll do my best to kind of squish them all up and compile them the way I can. It's said that she was first bought in Hokkaido in 1918 by a young man named Ikishi Suzuki, who had purchased the doll for his sister, Kikuko. Kikuko loved the doll and carried it with her everywhere at all times, and was never seen without her. She bathed with her, she slept with her, she ate with her. They were inseparable. Tragically though, Kikuko died suddenly of a sickness that came on very fast. The family was stricken with grief, and as such made a small shrine to their daughter in the house, with the doll featuring on top of it for something to pray to. They named it Okiku in remembrance of their lost daughter. It was after this they started to notice something deeply bizarre as the doll's hair began to grow. What was once a pretty simple bob hairstyle for a little doll grew longer and longer past the doll's body. The family took this as proof that the doll was inhabited by their daughter's spirit. Eventually, Kikuko's father passed on Okiku and gave her away to Menenji Temple to be cared for, since his family had to move to the mainland for work. It's here where Okiku still resides, where you can go and visit her actually. You can see her for yourself to offer her your blessings. A priest residing at the temple says that he has visions where Okiku speaks to him, asking him to cut her hair. And as far as all the things a haunted doll could tell you in your dreams, just asking to have her hair cut is pretty easy, so it's probably pretty wise to do it. One thing though, if you do visit, Okiku has kindly asked for no photos, so just be polite, be respectful, and ask if maybe she wants a few inches off the top when you go. And if you're looking for more stories of cursed objects, haunted relics, ghosts, goblins, aliens, demons, angels, creepypastas, and regular pastas, Top 5 Scary has all of that and way more than you can imagine. Drop a subscribe or a like and don't miss a single scream. Number 4. Letta. Usually with haunted dolls, I'd say the creep factor comes from that uncanny valley, you know? You look at it and you know it's supposed to be sweet and innocent, but it's harboring a dark secret. Well, no such thing is happening here. You can take one single look at Letta and you're like, yeah, that is a cursed doll. That is an evil, evil doll. Just looking at it through a screen radiates anger. Letta, which is apparently short for Letta Me Out, is living in Australia, and to paranormal enthusiasts is one of the more haunted dolls on the planet. Letta was found in the town of Wagga Wagga, and yeah, I had to Google that to make sure that was a real place. It's in New South Wales. It was 1970, and Carrie Walton was doing a bit of urban exploration with his brother, exploring abandoned houses to see what sort of urban treasures they could bring back. Sounds like some boyhood fun. Among one of the decaying properties, they found what they initially thought was a body, but upon digging, were way more excited to find a doll with a sadistic grin. Now, like any good treasure hunter, Walton was thrilled with his find. Imagine going into an abandoned house that'd been boarded up and finding a terrifying creepy doll underneath the floorboards and not immediately recognizing that you were in the start to a horror movie and burning it, but taking it home. Different strokes for different folks, I guess. Carrie and his brother drove the doll back to Brisbane, naming her Letta Me Out because they joked that it seemed like she was wriggling around in the back seat. That seems like a clear red flag and a warning sign, guys. They brought it home and immediately after they did, started to notice strange things. Scuffs all over the floors that seemingly matched up with Letta's little shoes. As well, they said that looking at it too long would start to make them feel sick, and that dogs seemed to have a strong aversion to the doll, seemingly able to sense the evil energy inside. You don't need to have a dog's nose to take one look at this thing and be able to smell the evil. Like I said, I can feel it through a computer screen, let alone in my face. Experts think the doll is over 200 years old and was crafted in Romania somewhere. But not much more than that is known, other than the fact that it's got a head of human hair and it is extremely terrifying. Letta has a surprisingly pretty active social media presence if you're interested in following a haunted doll on Instagram, and sometimes even does like tours to pose with fans. If you're into that sort of thing, if you're into that haunted doll celebrity status, let me be the first to say, I'll keep my distance. I did a little pun there. I don't know, that's just for the scholars at home. Number 3, Ruby. Ruby the doll is a doll living in the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal with a cursed history. I mean, of course, they don't make the dolls cursed out of the factory. At least, I don't think so. Tickle Me Elmo is a different case, though. She was an inaugural part of the museum, and since its opening has been a beloved sight to terrify guests. Ruby found her way into the Traveling Museum when a friend of the curator had discovered her in her home. She had been tucked away in a dusty old attic, which is like a haunted doll's least favorite place to be, wedged right between the Christmas decorations. She had been a treasured heirloom at some point generations ago in the Matthews family. Ruby initially belonged to a girl in the Matthews family who passed a long time ago holding Ruby in her arms. The family thought that in that moment, the spirit passed into the doll Ruby where it has stayed ever since. Ruby passed from generation to generation of the family, afraid that if they were to throw her out or get rid of her, there would be serious repercussions, afraid that there was still a soul inside. Now, according to the family, Ruby seemed far more lively than her porcelain would suggest. She seemed able to move around the room by herself, and they would report all sorts of creepy, bizarre sounds coming up from the attic. The family thought too that Ruby was making them sick, as they complained having her around was making people feel like they had headaches, allergies, extreme nausea, and feelings of violent paranoia, which usually if something in your home is causing you to do that, you would get rid of it. So the owner, Dana Matthews, was very tired of the fact that she felt like she had the spirit of a long dead relative that was always haunting and peering over their shoulders, and tried to call in a psychic to help the spirit pass on. After an exorcism, the Matthews were still being haunted by the doll and saw a good opportunity to pass it on to the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal, where she now still resides. The curators have said she's a very popular attraction, and guests find themselves overwhelmed with inexplicable feelings holding the doll and rocking it, feeling compelled to feel close and protect her. Do you think the spirit of that girl is still inside Ruby? I'm getting weird vibes just looking at pictures, and I'm never wrong about my vibes. Number 2, Robert. Now, Annabelle is the undisputed queen of the haunted doll game. Not to spoil too much about who number 1 is going to be, but you had to guess it was going to be her, right? Well, the runner-up for the second most famous haunted doll has got to go out to Robert the doll. His black, lifeless, beady little eyes have been serving up scares for the better part of a century, and we wonder if there's anything more beyond those little Funko Pop eyes. There's a bit of a back and forth debate as to the true origins of Robert the doll. Like any good urban legend, it's a bit of a choose-your-own adventure. All anyone can really agree on is that it was owned by someone named Robert Jean Otto. No one's even really sure where the doll came from, as efforts to find its original manufacturer have proven fairly fruitless. In some variations of the story, the doll was given to Otto by a servant who wanted to curse the family out of revenge. And in some versions, it was just given to him by his grandfather, who was just getting his grandson a cute little toy and was unaware of the possible evils within it. Either way you slice it, what's important is that Robert Jean Otto, who preferred to go by Otto, owned this little doll, and it was his best friend. Otto had a very active imagination, in a way that started to scare his parents. You know, when your teachers call you in for a little bit of a parent-teacher interview to talk about your worrying crayon drawings? That's kind of what was going on here. He would speak of this doll as it was a living thing, claiming that it would speak to him, tell him to do things. When mishaps or accidents around the house would happen, Otto would tell his parents that it was because Robert had commanded him to do it, or Robert himself had done it. Neighborhood kids too would say that they saw Robert moving from the windows when they walked by. Otto would grow up to be a prominent local artist and kept Robert with him until the day of his death in 1974. From then on, Robert found himself in the possession of the new owners of the old Otto estate, who claimed that they found him disturbing, that they saw his face move, that they would hear him stomping around, and that misfortune fell to those who insulted the doll. Eventually, they found it to be a bit much, and donated him to the Key West Art and Historical Society, where he became one of the most popular attractions. He's kept under a very tight lock and key, and it's said that those who disrespect him face his wrath. As such, Robert gets all sorts of fan mail and offerings from those who are hoping to be blessed or to get him to curse someone for them. And Robert, all that stuff I was saying earlier about you having lifeless eyes or Funko Pop eyes, that's just like joking between friends. You know that, right? Like, you know we're really close. You know I've always deeply respected you, and I love your little sailor outfit. Number 1, Annabelle. Well, I did kind of give it away in that last one, but yeah, come on, number 1 had to be Annabelle. It's a little cliche, maybe, but I was kind of worried that I might invoke her wrath by insulting her if I put her any lower, and I'm not looking to upset any more haunted dolls than I already have. Annabelle is kind of the breakout star of the cursed doll community, getting that sweet Conjuring franchise money and just raking it in on that spin-off and all her convention appearances and cameos. But how did she get her start as a humble haunted doll? The story goes that in the 1970s, a young nurse received Annabelle as a gift from her mother. She put Annabelle on top of the bed after making it, and Annabelle was cute little home decor. And she does look sweet, doesn't she? They really did her dirty in the movies when you see the real Annabelle, eh? They made her look evil. The owner and her roommate weren't as won over though, and they claimed that they felt creepy around Annabelle, and that they would feel like they noticed it moving. At first, small stuff, you know, showing up in a place they hadn't left her and so on. Annabelle turned the heat up a little bit when they discovered handwritten notes around the apartment. Scary messages that said things like, "Help me," which is never a good thing to discover if you have a haunted doll in your home, and probably not a good thing to discover ever. Naturally, this started to concern them deeply, peaking when they came home one day to discover Annabelle dripping in blood, fresh and bright red all over her hands. Now, for some reason, they didn't just burn Annabelle and torch the whole place down, but instead they were scared and had a male friend stay over, as they were all pretty freaked out. He claimed that one night, while sleeping over, he woke up and saw the doll sitting on his chest, her hands around his neck, and he woke up in a blinding panic, unsure if what he had seen was real or a dream. After that incident, everybody's favorite Connecticut demonologists, Ed and Lorraine Warren, were called in to claim Annabelle, where they could deal with the entity properly. They soaked her in holy water and sealed her away in a glass case inside their museum, where she resides when she's not taken out for one of her many convention appearances or red carpet looks. From humble beginnings to superstardom, Annabelle, we love ya.
Coming at number 5, when they were young. Well, sometimes you close your eyes and see the place where you used to live. This is true of Ed and Lorraine Warren as well. In fact, they were experiencing paranormal happenings way before they were in the spotlight. Looking back at their lives pre-demonology, there were lots of events that seemed to push them towards their career. Call it luck, call it destiny, the world seemed to have a whole lot of unexplainable events in store for the Warrens. Before Lorraine had even met Ed and still had her maiden name, she started to see things other people couldn't. At the young age of 9, she began noticing that some people were surrounded by different types of auras. Back then, she just assumed that everyone could see that. However, it became clear that these clairvoyant abilities were specific to her over time. Ed also had some paranormal experiences young, as he claimed that he lived in a haunted house when he was a boy. That kind of experience would drive anyone towards exploration of those kind of themes, right? Doors would open and shut on their own, and sourceless lights would appear in his home. Interesting, right? Well, these early appearances did a lot to inspire the duo to look deeper into the unknown as they aged. However, being young and inexperienced, they were also vulnerable to demonic possession. Neither ever told any stories of being under the influence of an entity while still a child, but they very well could have. A lot of demonic possession seem to happen in children, whether that means that they're more vulnerable to manipulation or their connection to the spirit world is stronger. So as young folks with a predisposition towards the unknowable side of things, they were at risk of falling under the influence more than most. In the end, it seems they fortunately avoided such a fate, but the world of demonology and as a result pop culture at large would look a whole lot different if either Ed or Lorraine's experiences were a little darker early on. It's wild to think what kind of cascading effects might have happened had they grown up a little differently. Ed apparently had to jump from a blazing oil tanker while serving in the Navy, and while swimming in that frigid water and fighting for his life, he prayed for help and was soon rescued. That near-death experience inspired him to profess his love for Lorraine and marry her. Imagine if instead he had questioned his faith or given into darker ways after such an event. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Smurl succubus. Anytime a succubus or incubus gets involved, you know things are going to get tricky. Humans are often weak in the face of temptation, and this kind of thing does not exclude famous demonologists. I won't go too deep into the details here, but Ed and Lorraine are not universally loved, and there are some very questionable stories about the two and their predispositions. This comes into play during the investigation of the Smurl family. In the mid-80s, this family contacted Ed and Lorraine for help with their haunting. After moving into their house over a decade ago, they'd experienced numerous terrifying ordeals. Their dog was thrown against the wall with force by an unseen presence. Their daughter was pushed down the stairs. Jack Smurl's ear was bitten, and both he and his wife Janet were assaulted by a demon. The last was apparently a succubus or an incubus, and you know what kind of assault those demons are interested in. So when Ed and Lorraine arrived on the scene, they already knew what was going on. Confirming that the Smurl house was indeed haunted, they got to work trying to figure out what to do about it. During their time investigating, Ed noticed a strange dark mass, and it really put him on edge. Apparently he was also left a message by the dark forces at play, one that read, "Get out." And that didn't go over well with Ed. Wanting to defeat this succubus, Ed came back with holy water and rosaries. He used these tools to fight against the demon, but to little avail. Apparently he was thrown 10 feet through the air by the demon and attacked on multiple occasions. Had he stuck around much longer, who knows what would have happened. In the end, he admitted he was not strong enough to deal with this presence and reached out to the Vatican. They sent an exorcism team, and the house was indeed eventually cleansed. A happy ending for sure, but that is definitely a close call for Ed and Lorraine, don't you think? Coming in at number 3, some Snedeker suspicions. In a different haunted house, this time occupied by the Snedeker family, another demon had a hold on their residence. Poltergeist attacks were common, and the Snedekers were also being assaulted by whatever presence was inside. The house, which was once a funeral parlor, was home to many terrible experiments and abuses upon the deceased. It was said that the man running the place beforehand would use corpses in dark rituals, and even use the bodies for unspeakable acts. So when Ed and Lorraine showed up, they had a lot to do. After hearing stories of the Snedekers being grabbed and their clothes being tampered with, they reached out to the local church and performed an exorcism. This could have ended poorly, as Ed admitted that the presence was terrible and diabolical. Had this exorcism gone south, all involved could have been hurt, possessed, or worse. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Union Cemetery sighting. Here's another famous case. In fact, the notoriety of the ghost present here goes beyond Ed and Lorraine's influence. They added to it for sure, but the White Lady of Union Cemetery is well known all on her own, thank you very much. So much so that she's contributed to many classic urban legends. Now when does she get a movie, right? Well, regardless of movie magic, Ed almost fell victim to this particular ghost one time. Although, to be honest, she seems more benevolent than malevolent. Attracting all sorts of paranormal enthusiasts from across the United States, the White Lady has made quite a name for herself. Late night motorists might notice a pale figure ahead on the map and slow down to see if they need help. Often she'll just disappear at that point, but sometimes she'll try to hitch a ride with them back to the cemetery itself. Ed and Lorraine took a trip out to Union to see what they could find and ended up running into the White Lady herself. Trusty video camera in hand, Ed supposedly captured footage of the White Lady. The evidence is so controversial and important that it was kept hidden for years. To this day, the legitimacy of this footage is called into question, and I'm sure that the ghost herself wasn't too happy about being potentially caught on camera. One has to wonder if she made any attempt to prevent the Warrens from getting a good shot. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Perron predicament. Most folks would be happy to have some famous demonologists on their side when fighting off whatever's invaded their home. However, if it's not going so well, or if you haven't heard of the folks trying to help you, things could play out a little differently. Although the Warrens' involvement with the Perron family is the focal point of the first Conjuring movie, things didn't exactly play out that way. After the Perrons purchased their Rhode Island home, things started getting weird. They experienced a number of paranormal attacks from all sorts of vengeful spirits. At a loss, they reached out to a number of paranormal experts, eventually being visited by the Warrens. However, this didn't help out all that much. In fact, the patriarch of the Perron family eventually had to ask the Warrens to leave his family alone, as their intervention seemed to be making the demons angrier. Hell, they might have been egging the demons on to go bigger. Maybe if they stuck around a little bit longer, the demons would have found a way into the Warrens. It wouldn't be too surprising considering how upset the Perrons were at the amount of help they were getting. Wild, right? You can't always trust the movie for the full story.
The fragments from Eastern Airlines Flight 401 hold quite a strange and creepy place in the Warren Occult Museum's collection. This flight, which tragically crashed in 1972 while traveling from New York to Miami, has a haunting legend associated with it. Picture this. We're on an Eastern Airlines flight from Atlanta to Miami, and a flight engineer was startled to see a uniformed crew member sitting in his seat who told him, quote, "You don't need to worry about the pre-flight," before completely vanishing. The engineer recognized the man as Don Repo, who had died in the crash of Eastern Flight 401 on December 29, 1972, when the plane crashed into the Everglades, killing 101 out of the 176 people on board. In the months following the accident, numerous reports emerged of sightings of Repo and Captain Bob Loft on Eastern planes, believed to be warnings about impending problems. These claims were detailed in John Fuller's 1976 book, The Ghost of Flight 401, which was later adapted into a TV film. Fuller argued that the sheer volume and specificity of the reports suggested their authenticity, despite Eastern Airlines' denial of such incidents and skepticism from some officials. Jay Repo, Don Repo's son, shared personal stories of his father's ghostly appearances, including an eerie encounter on his wedding night when he discovered a pair of Eastern Airlines wings in his hotel closet. According to the story, parts from the ill-fated aircraft were allegedly salvaged and reused on other planes within the fleet. Some say these replacement parts were imbued with the spirit of Don Repo. Persistent rumor, though never confirmed, that these haunted plane components brought about strange and unsettling occurrences on the aircraft they were installed in. Ed and Lorraine Warren were intrigued by this story and acquired some of the fragments as part of their collection. They were drawn to the objects due to their connection to one of the most chilling examples of a potential haunting linked to a very tragic event. In the museum, these fragments are treated with respect and caution, embodying the Warrens' belief in the possibility of lingering supernatural influences tied to objects from such a harrowing incident. If you are a fan of the Ed and Lorraine movies, you'll know that in the film Annabelle Comes Home, there is a very gripping scene where Daniela, one of the characters, puts on a mourning bracelet from the museum in an attempt to contact her deceased loved ones. This act not only violates the museum's strict no-touch policy, but also inadvertently opens the case containing the infamous Annabelle doll, which of course unleashes total chaos. However, in reality, there is no mourning bracelet in the Warrens Occult Museum. The bracelet featured in the movie was likely inspired by the Pearls of Death, a notorious and dangerous item that did exist in the museum. The Pearls of Death is a cursed necklace with a chilling reputation. It is said to have the terrifying ability to strangle anyone who dares to wear it. According to accounts, a previous owner of the necklace complained about being choked while wearing it, and rescuers had to forcibly remove the pearls to
save her life. Today, the pearls of death are displayed on the museum's shelves, marked with a clear warning not to touch them due to their dangerous nature. This necklace, while not featured in the Conjuring franchise, remains one of the most feared and perilous items in the Warrens' collection. The Devil Made Me Do It dinosaur toy is a particularly intriguing and eerie artifact housed in the Warren Occult Museum, with a chilling backstory connected to one of the most unusual legal cases in American history. In 1980, 11-year-old David Glatzel became the center of a supposed demonic possession, which escalated dramatically when his older sister's boyfriend, Arnie Cheyenne Johnson, allegedly took on the demon's challenge to leave David and possess him instead. The situation culminated in 1981 when Johnson fatally harmed Alan Bono, claiming the act was committed under demonic influence. The case marked the first time in US history that a defendant used demonic possession as a legal defense. The Warrens, deeply involved in this case, spent time with Johnson and his family, supporting the idea that a demonic force really was at play. Despite their efforts, the court dismissed the possession defense, leading to Johnson's conviction and a 5-year prison sentence. The trial and its supernatural claims were later dramatized in the film The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. So why did I just explain all of this to you? Well, let's take it back to the cursed items. Among the strange occurrences reported during the possession was the very bizarre behavior of David's dinosaur toy, which was said to have levitated and ominously warned the family, quote, "You're all going to die." This unsettling toy, now on display in the museum, is kept in an open container surrounded by rosary beads and other protective items, reflecting the Warrens' belief in its connection to the dark forces involved in the case. I don't know, maybe close up that container. I don't think we need it to be open, just in case. A man died. I'm just saying. Music obviously has quite the ability to invoke emotion, and one of these emotions is most definitely fear. A creepy scene in a horror movie is so much better with a score to match it, and that is what makes this next item so particularly haunting. What I am talking about is, of course, a haunted piano that played a significant role in the Warrens' experiences with the supernatural. Ed Warren often reported hearing the piano play on its own, but whenever he would enter the room to investigate, the music would mysteriously stop. The piano, which the Warrens acquired from the house of a deceased priest, became a focal point of their paranormal investigations. To manage the disturbances associated with it, Ed decided to have a priest bless the museum every 2 to 3 months, a practice that reportedly put an end to the piano's eerie performances. This haunted piano makes a very brief appearance in Annabelle Comes Home, where Judy's babysitter, Daniela, again, ventures into the Warrens' family room full of haunted artifacts, despite being warned not to touch anything. Though the piano doesn't play a major role in the film, Daniela's decision to ignore the warning and explore the room highlights the perils associated with meddling with the Warrens' collection. The piano remains a testament to the Warrens' belief in the lingering and sometimes malevolent energies that can attach themselves to these objects. In the Warren Occult Museum, a particularly chilling pair of artifacts includes a human skull and a satanic idol, each with its own dark history. The skull, which was used in a satanic ritual, arrived at the museum adorned with markings that suggest its use in occult practices. Nearby, the satanic idol has an even more sinister backstory. According to the tale recounted by Tony Spera, the real-life occult museum curator and son-in-law of renowned demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, this idol was discovered in the woods of Sandy Hook around 1991 by a hunter who was reportedly guided away from the scene by a mysterious man dressed in black. Intrigued by this strange occurrence, the hunter brought the idol to Ed Warren's attention. Ed, accompanied by the hunter, went to retrieve the idol which had been left behind. Shortly after the idol's acquisition, Lorraine Warren fell gravely ill, with doctors unable to provide provide a clear diagnosis for her condition. Ed was convinced that this illness was a result of the curse placed on them by a satanic cult high priest who originally owned the idol. It is noted that while satanic activities are not commonly discussed in Connecticut, it is believed that they are more prevalent than generally realized. The skull and idol are now displayed in the museum, representing the Warrens' belief in the dark and potentially harmful energies associated with such occult objects.
Coming in at number 5, we have Clara Germana Cele. Back in 1906, Clara was a young South African Christian who was said to have been possessed by a demon at the age of just 16 years old. Clara was a student at St. Michael's Mission in natal South Africa during this time, and it was at the age of 16 that she was said to have made a pact with Satan, which resulted in demonic possession, supposedly. In an account written by a nun, it was said that Clara could speak many languages that she wasn't capable of speaking prior to her possession. She was also reported to exhibit clairvoyance, with her revealing secrets and transgressions of people she had never met. It was also reported that Clara could not be in the presence of holy or blessed objects, a classic sign of possession, and when she was, she would seem to exhibit extraordinary strength and ferocity. A nun even stated that Clara would make peculiar sounds, stating, I quote, "No animal ever made such sounds, neither the lions of East Africa nor the angry bulls. At times it sounded like a veritable herd of wild beasts, orchestrated by Satan, and formed a hellish choir." 2 priests went on to perform an exorcism on Clara, with it lasting approximately 2 days. During the exorcism, it was said that Clara knocked the Bible out of the priest's hands and even attempted to choke him. By the end of those 2 days, it was said that the demon was expelled from the girl and that she was healed. Happy days. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, it really helps us out a lot in the YouTube algorithm. Coming in at number 4, we have Anna Eckland. Anna Eckland is actually a pseudonym for Emma Schmidt, a woman who was allegedly possessed by a demon, with exorcisms occurring over several decades, resulting in one extensive exorcism that took place between August 18th to December 23rd of 1928. Schmidt was born in Switzerland and was raised in a Catholic household in Wisconsin, and on June 18th of 1912, she underwent her first exorcism. After exhibiting signs of possession, including revulsion of holy objects, disturbed thoughts, and inability to enter churches. Now, despite the first exorcism taking place, it appeared to be unsuccessful, with the second exorcism being performed in 1928, with Eckland being moved to a convent after once again exhibiting strange symptoms, including fits of rage and the inability to be near blessed objects. The second exorcism was reported to be incredibly violent, with Eckland even levitating and howling during it. The first session lasted until August 26th, with the second session occurring between September 13th to September 20th, followed by a final 8-day session that lasted from December 15th to December 23rd. Eckland's body began to deteriorate during this time due to lack of food and constant vomiting. On December 23rd, Father Risinger commanded the demons out of Eckland and seemingly cured her of her possession. Coming in at number 3, we have Michael Taylor. Born in 1944, Michael Taylor was a man from the UK who became notable after he alleged that he was possessed by a demon. Taylor reported feeling evil inside of himself, even verbally lashing out during a Christian fellowship group. His behavior continued to become more erratic, with a local vicar turning to other ministers to call out the demon that was supposedly living inside of Taylor. An exorcism took place between October 5th to 6th, with the ministers believing that after an all-night session they had cast the demons out of Taylor. However, they did state that 3 remained: insanity, murder, and violence. However, Taylor was allowed to go home. When he did return home, though, he brutally murdered his wife, and he was found by local police naked in the street and covered in his own blood. At his trial, Taylor was acquitted on grounds of insanity and was sent to Broadmoor Hospital for 2 years before being sent to a secure ward in Bradford, before ultimately being released. Jumping forward to 2005, Taylor was once again in the news after touching someone inappropriately, resulting in him once again being ordered in psychiatric treatment. Seems less like the devil and more like a deranged human being who should not be allowed to live amongst society. In my opinion, that is. Coming in at number 2, we have Anneliese Michel. Anneliese, often referred to simply as Anna, was a German woman who was said to have undergone roughly 67 Catholic exorcisms during the year prior to her death. When Anna was 16 years old, she began to experience seizures and was ultimately diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. Not long after that, she was diagnosed with depression and was treated at a hospital. However, by the time Anna turned 18, she began to exhibit violent tendencies. She began hearing voices and was intolerant of religious objects that were around her family's home. Her condition continued to worsen, resulting in her family believing that she was possessed by a demon. The family ultimately turned to the Catholic Church for help, with priests being approved to conduct a series of exorcisms on the girl, with the family halting any communication with doctors altogether. During the ordeal, Anna began to stop eating and ultimately passed away from malnourishment and dehydration following 67 grueling exorcism sessions. The girl's parents and the 2 Roman Catholic priests were found guilty of negligent homicide and spent 6 months in prison for their crimes. There are many popular horror movies that took inspiration from this case, including The Exorcism of Emily Rose, as well as Anneliese the Exorcist tapes. And finally, in at number 1, we have Roland Doe. Now, this case claims our number 1 spot, and rightfully so, with this true possession case being the story to inspire the movie The Exorcist. Back in the late 40s, a young boy dubbed Roland Doe was alleged to be possessed by a demonic entity, with priests from the Roman Catholic Church performing a series of exorcisms to attempt to expel the demons residing within. Roland Doe was said to be a German Lutheran, with him and his family residing in Cottage City in Maryland. However, according to reports, on one particular occasion his spiritual aunt allowed him to play with a Ouija board, which may have resulted in his supposed possession. According to reports following the death of Roland Doe's aunt, the family began to experience strange goings-on within the home. Noises, furniture moving on its own accord, and ordinary objects levitating. The family ultimately turned to their pastor, Miles Schultz, with him arranging for Roland Doe to spend a night in his home to monitor the boy. Schultz claimed to witness those same goings-on within his home when the boy was there. An exorcism was arranged, with documents from that exorcism stating how the boy slipped his hand loose from his restraints and managed to break a bed spring from under his mattress, using it as a weapon to attack the priests. During another exorcism on the boy, it was reported that words such as evil and hell appeared on Roland Doe's body, with the mattress beginning to shake during the ritual. Despite the terrifying goings-on after the rite was over, it was said that Roland Doe went on to lead a rather ordinary life. However, like I said, this case shocked the world after William Peter Blatty chose to use elements from the events in his novel The Exorcist back in 1971, with the famous story going on to be one of the most successful and famous movies of all time.
Rosemary's Baby is an iconic movie in the world of horror films, and boy oh boy was this thing cursed. The first unlucky soul was Komeda. Details of his death are still scarce, but director Roman Polanski told it this way. In autumn of 1968, then 37-year-old was roughhousing at a party when he fell off a rocky escarpment and onto a 4-month coma. The very same affliction Levin's witches used to kill Rosemary's suspicious friends in the book that the movie was based off of. Komeda never regained consciousness and died in Poland the following year. In April of 1969, producer William Castle, sick with worry from the hate mail he was constantly receiving, was suddenly stricken with severe kidney stones. While delirious in the hospital, he hallucinated scenes from the film and was said to have yelled, "Rosemary, for God's sake, drop the kitchen utensil that I can't say." Castle recovered, just barely, and never made a Hollywood hit ever again. Then there's Polanski's fate, told and retold into legend even by him. So he had relocated to California alongside his new girlfriend, actress Sharon Tate, who was fresh off her first movie role as a witch in Eye of the Devil, just before filming began. She had really tried to get the lead role in Rosemary's Baby, but Paramount wanted Mia Farrow. Tate instead loitered on the set, appearing uncredited like a ghost in the background of Rosemary's young people only party scene, and say some, becoming increasingly obsessed with the occult. Many years later, a friend quoted her in print as having said, "The devil is beautiful. Most people think he's ugly, but he's not." So Polanski last saw Tate, by then his wife and very pregnant, in July of 1969, noting in his autobiography a grotesque thought he had at the time, "You will never see her again," he wrote. Tate was brutally killed on August 8th by the Manson family, as was, well, her unborn son, all while Rosemary's Baby still lingered in theaters. Unable to make sense of such a tragedy, and captivated by the stories of the Manson family, the public took to Satan and curses as the only explanation. Internet fanatics say, like Guy Woodhouse, Polanski made his young wife a sacrifice for his still untouchable status in Hollywood and beyond. Others maintain the Manson killings were a mere moment in a grand satanic conspiracy scored by the Beatles. The White Album was written largely at a meditation that had Mia Farrow in attendance, and the song title, Helter Skelter, albeit misspelled, was scrawled in human fluids at the crime scene. And And a dozen years later, Lennon was assassinated across the street from the Dakota, the landmark where Rosemary's Baby was filmed. So, if Rosemary's Baby is actually cursed, how did the original author, Ira Levin, dodge his fate? He didn't. Well, he never fell from a cliff to his dramatic demise. He suffered a more fitting kind of poetic justice. First, his marriage crumbled, and when the divorce finalized, with the divorce finalizing in 1968, and he never rode the Rosemary's Baby wave into Hollywood. Perhaps a blessing in disguise, but he certainly got the fame he was looking for. Catholics in particular bombarded him with ongoing criticism, as did the Catholic Church, which very publicly slapped a C rating, aka condemned, onto the film for its mockery of religious persons and practices. Now, he didn't really believe in witches or curses, and he said over and over again, but fear grew in him just the same. On a 1980 episode of The Dick Cavett Show, appearing alongside a gregarious Stephen King, Levin sits quiet, pensive, and insecure. I don't recall being scared at all, he said, of his early horror inspirations, but now I'm terrified. Many believe the set of the original Poltergeist trilogy, which came out in the 1980s, was cursed, attributing to the long string of unfortunate circumstances that followed the cast and crew to the use of real human skeletons in the first film. Neither the crew nor Jo Beth Williams, who was literally inside the pool with them, knew the skeletons were real and not in fact just props. Turns out at the time, making fake skeletons that looked photorealistic was a lot more expensive than buying real cadavers. Technically, I already knew that fact, since many of the original skeletons on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland were also real cadavers that were donated from UCLA. Those skeletons of the 1950s and 60s they weren't it. Thankfully, over time, Imagineers' ability to sculpt and render more realistic bones, coupled with the need for maintenance repairs and decay, resulted in the removal of the skeletons, minus one skull. Proper burials were reportedly given each time a skeleton was removed from the ride. Yay! Sorry, I know. Back on topic we go. Before the final Poltergeist film was released, 4 cast members passed away, including the young girl who played Carol Ann. A 5th was brutally killed over a decade later, and 1 more narrowly escaped their own death. So, how did this all go down? So the same year that the first movie came out, Dominique Dunn, the 22-year-old who played Dana, was hand-necklaced in her driveway by an awful ex. Julian Beck, who played Kane, died of cancer before the second film's release, and Will Sampson, who played Taylor, died at only 53 from post-operative kidney failure. Heather passed away before hitting her teenage years, before the final film hit the big screen from a severe bowel obstruction. And in 2009, Lou Perryman, who played Pugsley, was killed with an axe in his home by an ex-con who wanted to steal his car. Richard Lawson, who played Ryan, was aboard US Air Flight 405, which crashed after takeoff. Over half the plane's passengers were killed by the crash, but Richard fortunately survived. While filming the first movie, one of the young stars was almost hand-necklaced by a possessed clown doll. In the freak accident, the mechanical clown gripped the boy's neck so tight, he started to yell that he couldn't breathe and his face turned blue. Steven Spielberg had to jump in and pry the clown's hands off his neck and save his life. While one technically can't attest all these tragedies to the set's curse, there's a lot of death and destruction surrounding this whole film. So much so that one cast member did an exorcism of the second movie's set, trying to ease people's nerves. Yeah, I'm calling it cursed. I know a curse when I see one. I can call a spade a spade. The Crow is a dark superhero film that was released in theaters in 1994, and during its time, it was well received and has since garnered a strong cult following. The flick is based on a comic book written by James O'Barr by the same name and stars Brandon Lee as Eric Draven, a rock musician who is brought back to life to avenge the death of his fiancée. Critics praise the film for its style and emotional depth, and rightfully so. From the very beginning of the filming process, filmmakers showed up on set to a voicemail message that said that bad things would happen if they made the movie, and before long, the message was right. On the first day of production, an electrician was backing up a cherry picker truck and hit the high-tension wire on the power lines above him. He was electrocuted and caught on fire. Everybody rushed him to the hospital where he was treated for second and third degree burns, and even though he survived, his ears had to be removed. After that, a hurricane destroyed the Crow's backlot set, and from there, rumors of the curse began to spread through the media. Now, some folks thought the curse was attributed to Brandon Lee, whose father Bruce Lee had died under mysterious circumstances, thought to be part of a family curse. No matter what you believed though, it was an on-set accident involving Brandon Lee that cemented The Crow as one of the most cursed films in history. While filming a scene where Brandon Lee walks into a room to discover his fiancée is being harmed, a character named Fun Boy fires an explosive at him. Unfortunately, nobody noticed or recognized that a dummy round had become lodged in the barrel of the device being used. It was then loaded with blank rounds that would simulate real explosives. However, these rounds were enough to force the cartridge that was lodged in the barrel to fire at nearly the same velocity as a real round. It struck Lee, and he later died at the hospital. In order to finish the film, producers rewrote parts of the script and had to cut the Skull Cowboy character completely, as nothing had been filmed with him yet. A curse. As if I was going to talk about possessed sets today without mentioning The Conjuring. Just as it's not a typical horror film, the inspiration for The Conjuring was also not the traditional story. Most fans of the horror universe know that it's based off of the real-life case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren, the husband and wife paranormal investigative team that we very much love around here. I've talked about them too many times to count. The writers, directors, and producers on The Conjuring and its sequels consulted extensively with the real-life Lorraine Warren until her death in 2019. What's fascinating is that this story in particular, out of all their cases, had a profound effect on the Warrens themselves. The late Ed Warren insisted to producer Tony DeRosa Grunt that the first film made explicitly about his and his wife's investigations be based on the Perron case. The actors who played the Warrens were strongly affected by both the Perron case and its dramatization, just like their real-life counterparts, and not just because it spawned a successful film franchise whose universe is still growing today. Vera Farmiga, for example, who played Lorraine Warren, found herself mysteriously and repeatedly waking up between 3 and 4 in the morning on set. Yeah, the witching hour. Don't worry, it gets even creepier than that. In this particular film, the specific time window in which the witch character died was during said witching hour. Vera was so shaken by the experience that it was she who pointed out to the director the uncanniness of this connection, and her sleep troubles persisted even after the movie wrapped. In addition to sleep disturbances, Vera also dealt with mysterious claw marks that seemed to follow her wherever she went, even transcending both physical and digital barriers. Sadly, these tend to be kind of commonplace with possessed and cursed things. The first time she encountered a set of the 3 mysterious claw marks, they appeared on her computer screen, an interesting choice for a spirit to reveal itself. She had been working on her laptop and then closed it normally to take a phone call about being in The Conjuring, a phone call in which she expressed both her interest in the project and her desire to have Patrick Wilson play the part of her husband, saying that if he was in, she was in. So when she opened her laptop again, she found 3 diagonal digital claw marks descending from right to left. Later on set, she discovered 3 claw marks, but this time they cropped up much closer to home. They were now on her thigh. Thankfully, that was the last time they showed up, but still. Speaking of modeling marks, Joey King, the actress playing Christine, one of the 5 Perron daughters, also apparently ended up covered in strange bruises after just a couple of weeks of shooting, despite not being involved in any of her character's stunts. And she's never had a bruising problem before or since. When the real Perron family visited the set of the film, one of the original Perron girls told co-writer Chad Hayes with conviction that she had a feeling something bad was going to happen that day. And she was right. To the shock of production and family alike, her now elderly mother fell and broke her hip so seriously that they had to operate and replace it, well, ASAP. Writer Carrie Hayes actually had to confide in the real Lorraine Warren on the Conjuring set about something he was going through. Something Lorraine seemed to think was connected to the fact that he was spending his days on set and away from home. While Hayes was away, his wife would find mysterious water formations appearing around his house without any kind of explanation. So at first he thought his elderly dog was to blame. And he was like, okay, I'm gonna tell my wife, take the dog out. But the wife was like, no, we took the dog out. And the water wasn't smelling at all, even though it needed 3 huge beach towels to clean it up. Finally, Lorraine was like, you're dealing with a water poltergeist. She informed him that spirits often reveal themselves more when men are away and women are home alone and defenseless. So wives and mothers often encounter more of the supernatural. Well, stay at home mothers. Additionally, a water poltergeist feeds off of angst, which is why the water formations always appeared after a spat happened in the household. Once Hayes understood the presence though, he was able to get to the root of the situation and get rid of it. But still, no thank you. Alrighty, how about we end today with a set that was only mildly cursed? Another flick that was based off of the investigations of Ed and Lorraine Warren, Insidious, was a set where most people felt uneasy and could not shake off generally negative energy. In addition, the cast continually heard a strange buzzing noise from various empty rooms and around the set when there was nobody there. These unexplained events followed through to the sequel, released in 2013 as Insidious Chapter 2. Cast and crew working in the hospital reported unexplainable creepy accidents, including a sudden unshakable feeling of queasiness the moment they stepped on set, and an unseen bell from an abandoned level of the building ringing every few moments. And that brings us to the end of our time, and I have half a mind to bring a bottle of holy water with me next time I step on a set. That is, if I can handle it without burning myself.